Why are all the weirdest animals always extinct? Like, imagine waking up in a world where there are extremely eerie looking elephants or reptile things that have heads so large that they take up half of their body, or reptiles that barely have a head at all, or nightmare wolves that are double the height of normal humans roaming around the planet. Today, we are going to be diving into the most strange animals to ever exist. Animals so weird that they used to roam our planet, but you're going to think that they are from a different planet. This is the weird extinct animal iceberg. This is a chart that has a whole lot of very eerie and weird animals that used to live, from more well-known things like the giant ground sloth or the dodo bird, to more obscure and less heard of things such as the hammerhead reptile or the Tully monster. But if you like animals or you like prehistoric stuff, then stick around and we will go ahead and get into the video. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for 590,000 subs here on YouTube. We're about to hit 600,000, so if you're here before 600k, then comment you're in the 600 pre 600k club. Starting off at the top of the iceberg with tier 1, the woolly rhino. This is a massive ice age rhinoceros species that is covered in long shaggy hair and was built for extreme cold weather in the open plains. What I think is really cool about this animal is prehistoric people saw this and thought it was so cool that they made cave paintings of it. It's crazy to think that 30,000 years ago, amidst an ice age, they're barely surviving. You know, people are sitting around saying, wow, these suckers are really cool. And now it's 30,000 years later and we are looking at like a piece of rock that is projecting light into our eyes. And we're still sitting here thinking, dang, that sucker's cool. And it's like, have we really changed that much? I mean, it's strange to think about creating something at such a time, and now we still see it, and we still appreciate it. Anyways, it's also worth noting that the Magdeburg unicorn, which is like the worst fossil reconstruction ever, had pieces of the woolly rhinoceros put inside of it. I think its front legs were part of the Magdeburg unicorn, and maybe its jaw, or its like entire skull. Moving on, we got the great auk. So to me, this is one of the saddest things that we have recently lost. Well, like kind of recently. It has a really weird extinction story, but some background information. This thing was basically a penguin. It was a flightless bird that was black and white, and it had a crazy range where it lived from Florida here in the United States and went all the way up the east coast, all the way over to northern Africa, which is like so crazy. These were actually the original penguins. In their day, they were commonly called penguin or gairfowl, and it's crazy, all other penguins that we know of today that are like all from the southern hemisphere were named afterwards because they looked like the great auk. But the great auk became extinct because, you know, it couldn't fly and it always grouped up and was always in a predictable area nesting, and they were in these breeding colonies close to rocks along shorelines, especially in like the North Atlantic area, and where there was one, there was always more. So they were basically hunted to extinction because people wanted their meat and their fat, which was probably pretty good, but they also wanted their highly prized down feathers, which were used for things like bedding or pillows. And this is one of the few extinction of animals that we know like exactly how and when it went extinct. So the last great auk that was seen in Britain was, no joke, killed because the person thought it was a witch. So it was captured in 1840 and it was tied up and kept alive for 3 days until this large storm arose and they were on this island, and for some reason the people that had tied up the bird thought that it was a witch that was causing the storm out of anger, and so they instantly killed it, and that was the last one ever seen in Britain. The last confirmed pair ever was killed in 1844 on Edley Island in Iceland, and for some reason they also stomped on the last egg too when they were trying to capture the bird, and basically this species vanished in this single documented moment where they captured the last nesting pair and also stepped on the egg. And it's kind of sad because these were really cool birds. We had some of the coolest birds of all time living in a massive range. Forkedicorn. So this is a forked unicorn deer thing from the Miocene age called Synthetoceras. It's actually not a deer and it's not an antelope or a camel, but it's kind of like all three combined, but it's most closely related to a camel. It's known for having this weird 3-horn configuration. It had this crazy like Y-shaped horn that came out of its nose, kind of like a unicorn, and it lived across North America, especially in the Great Plains, in Nebraska, and in Texas. Only males had this dramatic Y-horn shape on their face. Females actually lacked them entirely, as they believe it was used strictly for display, but also possibly like dominance and ritualized combat, similar to how modern antelope act today. The lace crab. So this is a crazy looking arthropod known as the Marrella. It looks like a mix between a starfish and a trilobite. It was actually misclassified as a trilobite in 1909, and it took decades to realize how this thing was part of a now defunct class of creature. Ivory-billed woodpecker. Bro, I already know what the comments are going to say on this one. I've seen one in my backyard. My buddy saw one. No, he did not. I cannot stress this enough. You have not seen one of these. Like, I'm all for tales of like seeing like alleged creatures, cryptids and stuff, but the likeliness of you seeing one of these is astronomical. You're probably seeing a pileated woodpecker. Here's a picture of the two. I know they look extremely similar. There's constantly resurfacing online where people are like, we've rediscovered the ivory-billed woodpecker, and then they have like this blurry picture of a raven or a pileated woodpecker. And like, it would be so awesome if they rediscovered it. That would be the most incredible news of all zoology stuff. That'd be so sick. But this thing was such a cool bird. It was enormous. It was the largest woodpecker in the world with a 2.5-foot wingspan. It had these dramatic black and white wings and brilliant red crest. It was native to the southern part of the United States and also Cuba, and suffered this catastrophic decline due to logging of the old growth forest habitat. But this thing especially lived in areas like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, and by the time conservationists realized that they were in danger, the ecosystem that they needed to regrow was already gone, and it was going to take forever to get it back. I mean, that ecosystem is gone. With the last universally accepted sighting in the US being back in 1944, and also the last accepted sighting in Cuba being in 1987. Although I don't think that one was legit, but I'll leave that to the experts. Anyways, because this thing hasn't been seen in so long, US Fish and Wildlife have proposed declaring that it's extinct in 2021, but they're still analyzing it because people are constantly saying that they're rediscovering it, like the rediscovering in 2004 in Arkansas. And I'm not an expert. I really shouldn't say anything. I do hope they found it, but all the evidence they have is like these extremely blurry videos. I mean, they're just... Anyways, if I see one person say that they've seen an ivory-billed woodpecker, I'm gonna lose it. Thylacine. So this is an uncanny wolf marsupial thing that is sometimes called the Tasmanian tiger. People are always kind of going on about how they're trying to find them or they've maybe seen them. This was a carnivorous marsupial that once was native to Australia. It looks like a wolf thing that has stripes down its back. It has this weird jaw that can open up to 80 degrees and like kind of unhinge. But it was hunted to extinction after being blamed for killing livestock. Something to note is that because its jaw was so weird, it likely couldn't kill very large animals. So it was more likely that feral dogs were to blame for the livestock killing, and the thylacine was kind of the scapegoat that took the blunt force of all that. This animal tragically went extinct in 1936 when the last known individual died in captivity. What's so crazy is the zookeeper expected to find a replacement for it, so he didn't really bother keeping records of what this thing was or like if it was a male or female. And so the gender of the last known thylacine wasn't determined until 2011 after researchers were watching old film of the thing. People were always trying to find it and saying that they saw it and stuff online, and Forrest Galante is always looking for it on his stuff, and I hope he finds it. I hope it's still out there. That'd be so sick. Anyways, I believe the genetics lab Colossus, the same one that brought back the dire wolf, is planning to take genetics and DNA and clone this thing and bring it back to life, and maybe even reintroduce it back into the native environment in Australia, which would be so crazy. Jurassic Park, Jurassic Australia. Moving on to tier 2, Sacabambaspis. In some models of this thing, it looks like the silliest, happiest little creature that you've ever seen, and you just want to pat him on the head. But others look like this kind of eerie, uncanny valley looking giant tadpole. This is an extinct genus of armored jawless fish. It's only about 10 inches long, and it's shaped just like a tadpole but larger. But because it's jawless, the scientists think this thing was a filter feeder or just a scavenger, and it used its small mouth to suck things in like Kirby. And then it had this armored plated head that was encased in shield-like bone and protected it from early marine predators. People are probably going to be like, I saw one in 2018. Brother, it was 400 million years ago. Ancient horned turtle. So this thing, literally Bowser, this thing is called the Meiolania. It is a giant, heavy, armored, prehistoric turtle from the Miocene era. This thing has horns, which is really cool, and this clubbed tail that is kind of like an ankylosaur, which is baller. This shell reached about 6.5 feet long, so this thing was massive, and it was a fully land-dwelling turtle with heavy horns and an armored tail that wasn't meant for swimming, and that's how they knew it lived on land. And it likely used its horn and tail for defense in intra-species combat, so if some sort of creature came up to it and was, trying to eat it, it's gonna slap it with its big old turtle Bowser tail. And I feel like this is something that would, kind of get along pretty well in modern day too. Giant ground sloth. I like giant ground sloths. I actually saw a skeleton of one of these at a museum in Utah one time, and it was really cool. These things are actually a lot larger than I had originally thought they were. Some species could reach up to 20 feet tall and weigh over 4 tons, which means they were actually taller than modern day elephants. And what I find really interesting about them is they dug these huge tunnels with their big old sloth claws, and in Brazil you can still go see them because the caves are like fossilized. These tunnels are so big that you can walk through them without crouching down. You can just stand upright and walk through these tunnels, which kind of makes sense because, they were taller than an elephant. But you can still see these distinct claw marks from them digging through this dirt and clay, and they would build these extensive cave systems that we still have 10,000 years later, so they've held up well. And even in these caves, they have found things like mummified dung that is perfectly preserved, and this allows scientists to reconstruct exactly what their diets were in detail. Anyways, over 30 species of them lived in the Miocene era through the end of the Pleistocene ages. And what a lot of people don't know is it is actually closer related to the anteater and armadillos than the modern tree sloths today. Odontogriphus. So I'm just going to talk about this thing briefly because you don't want me to talk about a slug for forever. Do you want to hear about a slug for a really long time? I think we've been through this before. We don't want to talk about. This was a slug-like creature that had this toothed tongue that it would use to scrape microscopic food off of things. And really, it's just like a singular muscular foot, which is really strange. Yeah. I don't know why I added this one. Moropus. So this is a clawed horse thing. This is from the Miocene period in North America. Some were found in Asia. The name of this thing actually means slow foot. They think this thing kind of like walked really weird because of the way its legs were set up. It kind of like skipped. It didn't skip. It was like this thing walked bad. It had a bizarre mix of features like long forelimbs with 3 huge claws on each front foot instead of hooves, despite looking like a horse thing, and it used these claws likely to dig roots or pull down branches, and it kind of resembled a blend between a horse, a gorilla, and a giant sloth. Tier 3, the Boar Croc. So this thing is called Kaprosuchus. It's pretty much terrifying, basically dragon with no wings. That's what I would say, but people are gonna say it's not a dragon. Can we be honest? This is dragon. This thing had big vampire teeth, and it was a crocodile-like thing that was living at the time of the dinosaurs. It had this terrifying appearance with these 3 sets of boar-like tusks that stuck out in an already crazy-looking mouth. It was estimated to be about 20 feet long and a capable, proficient hunter on land and in water. And unlike crocs in modern times, these things had a cutting edge on their tooth for slicing prey. Like a lot of, dinosaurs, they always have a serrated tooth. And so, I mean, look at this thing. Long legs, it's running around on land, it's got vampire teeth. If it had wings, it may as well be a dragon. This thing probably galloped like a horse. Platybelodon. So let's be honest, we all know someone who looks kind of like this. This is a really surreal looking kind of elephant thing that lived in the area that is now Asia and Africa. Obviously, what's weirdest about them is their massive elongated duck mouth looking thing. Scientists used to think that the lower jaw was used as a scoop to scoop up vegetation and moss and stuff in swamps, but now more recently they've discovered it's more likely being used as like a saw to cut off tree branches and eat more leaves. That's what it's all about, eating more leaves, and also to like remove bark from trees. And while at first they didn't think that it had a trunk at all and that it was just great big massive scary duck mouth, and if you saw this thing in your bedroom and it didn't have a trunk, you would say, HR department, come help me. But now we have decided it looked a little bit more like this, which kind of honestly makes it more weird because, it's like it's slightly smaller than modern elephants, but it's still about the size of a small car, and it's got the big mouth and a trunk. And I don't know. Is it scarier before or after? I'd probably say before. Giant sea scorpion. So this thing is called Pterodaustro. It is essentially a giant prehistoric sea scorpion that is absolutely horrifying. Everything about it, horrifying. Some of these things grew very large, taller than humans, and over 8 feet long. They had these claws like crabs that was attached to a scorpion-like body, and the way its eyes were set in its head let us know that it was less of a scavenger and more of an active hunter. So imagine there is an 8-foot long giant scorpion with crab claws that is actively chasing you underwater. Oh my goodness. I think at that point you would just have to, is it even worth running away? Flamingo pterosaur. So I am just now learning about this thing. I had not heard of it until making this video. This is called Pterodaustro, and yes, we used to have flamingo pterosaurs. Basically, this thing is famous for having these thousands of bristle-like teeth that it likely used for filter feeding, kind of like baleen whales. This is one of the strangest feeding systems of any flying reptile. We assume that it probably had a similar lifestyle and behavior of modern-day flamingos, as flamingos also have these kind of like specialized feeder teeth things in their mouth as well. Because of this, scientists have proposed that maybe this thing even had a similar coloration to modern day flamingos. Because of its diet, flamingos, they get pink because of the algae they eat in the shrimp that they're always eating. The hell pig. So this is the Entelodon. This thing must have been terrifying and a plague on the entire planet, and I'm glad we're not dealing with it anymore, to be honest. This was a massive bone-crushing omnivore from the Eocene period. The largest of the species was 7 foot tall at the shoulders and weighed over 2,000 pounds. Despite its nickname, it is not a pig, but rather it's from a separate branch that roamed Eurasia and North America back in the day. It's closer related to hippos and even porpoises, like dolphins, and it had huge skulls that were sometimes over 3 feet long, bone-crushing jaws capable of eating meat and plants, and everything, whatever it wanted, it was just going to eat. I mean, what are you going to do against this thing? But it had some strange body proportions, long, narrow legs, massive heads, a deep, muscular neck, probably for just smacking people with its face. Well, not people, unless. But yeah, you get the point. Evil pig. They're gone now. We're dealing with different pigs now. Mimetaster. or Mimetaster. Okay, this is not Mimetaster. No, Mimetaster. This thing looks like a starfish, shrimp, spider, crab amalgamation. This is an extinct species of arthropod that was discovered in Germany, and they were actually a super common animal in the Devonian period. Their appearance looks like these 3 pairs of long, straight, spine-bearing legs, stalked eyes like a snail, and it had this raised ovular head shield with long spined projections that looked like a starfish. Tier 4. Sharovipteryx. So this is a gliding lizard thing that is pretty similar to a modern day lizard that we have, the Draco lizard, but this one is the only known animal ever to glide with its pelvic membrane instead of its pectoral membrane, which just means it has wings on its legs. And yeah, really weird. It's roughly about 10 inches long. Just like today's modern lizard, it would climb up trees and glide down. But unlike today's gliding lizard thing, they think it was really good at gliding and maneuvering as if it was like a paper airplane. Are those good at maneuvering though? False-toothed bird, Pelagornithidae. So this thing was essentially a giant albatross. It was actually the largest flying bird to ever live, with a wingspan up to 24 feet wide. It was not the heaviest bird to ever live, that was the Argentavis, but Pelagornithidae had these false teeth-looking things on their beaks that were jagged formations that it used to gobble up slippery prey such as squid or other fish from the ocean, and it was found all over the world on every continent, including Antarctica. What's also interesting is it only went extinct roughly 12,000 years ago. Permanently smiling whale. So I chose this one because I saw this graphic online and I thought it was really silly, goofy mode. This is a newly discovered species of early toothed baleen whale from the Oligocene period in the South Carolina area. This just means that whenever ancient whales had teeth, they could both bite and filter feed. And look at this picture. How does this make you feel? How do you feel? Do you feel good when you see this thing? You're receiving cursed knowledge. Yeah, look how weird this thing is. But I did like this graphic. It showed all these different toothed early whales, and they're all laughing, they're all smiling, except for the bottom left one. He was not having a good time. I don't know what the deal with that is. This picture right here, I gotta say, this thing, there's not many things that you see like this that make you feel some type of way, and that is what this is. It's somehow, I know I've said this on a few animals, but it's somehow uncanny. Maybe it's the way the mouth is shaped, because it's like, it's kind of smiling. It's like kind of tempting you. It's like, I might be a nice guy, but then you look in closer and you see it's got sharp teeth, and then you look into its eye and you see the malevolent possibility of its thoughts behind those eyes. It's kind of like whenever you look at Thylacine, the orca that killed all those people. You look in his eyes and you see it, you know? It's like, do you remember the thing with the homeless guy? Do you think he did that on accident? No way did Thylacine accidentally, intricately do what he did. Anyways, Cotylorhynchus. This is the dude that does not train in the library, if you know what I'm saying, because his head's small. Tiny head, massive body. He's a synapsid creature. This thing was from the Permian period, the one right before the dinosaurs, and it was a large herbivore that lived on land. This thing looks like a toad, but his head got hit with shrink ray. But it lived all over what is now Texas and Oklahoma, and it's pretty thick. It was one of the largest land animals in the world when it was dominating. I mean, if this thing probably pretty heavy. Like, imagine this thing rolling over on you. That'd be... Anyways, look at this pic of it right next to a person. I imagine this thing did not walk, and it just hopped. I know its legs don't necessarily look like that, but I like to think of it hopping around. And also, what's up with its claws? Like, they look like little Yoda fingernails. Is this the inspiration for Yoda? No. Terror bird. So this was a giant murder bird that could grow up to 10 feet tall, and its head could be roughly the same size as a horse. It was a terrifying creature that lived in what is now modern day Argentina. It had this horrifying pickaxe-like beak that it could use to deliver death blows to prey, and we know this because we found like fossils of its neck and stuff, and its neck was really thick and strong, and so it probably just hammered things with its beak. like. But I imagine this thing was probably quite the apex predator. It likely communicated and heard in low frequency hearing that it used to talk with each other in low roars and track prey. So I imagine these things kind of talking to each other, kind of like modern day wild turkeys where they hit that booming sound. I'm sure there's other birds that do that too in modern day, but I don't really know. But its diet primarily consisted of notungulates, which were these little small mammal things that were kind of like smaller version of rhinos. Well, I guess they weren't that small, which notungulates, if they were alive today, I bet they would be great to eat. I will say, I respect animals, I love animals, but you're telling me if you got a hold of a notungulate, you wouldn't try a little bit of it. I'm not talking about anything crazy, I'm just talking about like, just trying a little bit. If the population was good, okay? Andrewsarchus. So this was a moose-sized wolf-looking thing. It was likely the largest land mammal carnivore to ever exist. And despite that, we know very little about them. We have only found a 3-foot-long skull of this creature with no lower jaw. But from what we can figure out with the skull, scientists have estimated that it was 6 foot tall at the shoulder and 13 feet long. Although some reconstructions estimate it being 17.5 feet long, which is massive. What we do know is that this thing was found in Mongolia, and it's kind of placed close to looking like the Entelodonts, the hell pig things that we talked about earlier, but this thing has a wolf-like reconstruction despite not really being related to modern day wolves at all, and it was likely hoofed. All around pretty strange. I am actually kind of speechless looking at this thing once again. How can we know so little about it? It just seems like we should know more. And also its name is Andrew, so Andrew, you found a 3-foot skull. Can we find a little bit more? Am I right? Are you guys not also thinking? I think you guys are thinking that. Tier 5, Longisquama. So this is a reptile from the Triassic period that is known for having these long modified scales that stick out of its back like a dorsal sail. We don't know exactly what the sail was for. It was either for display mating ritual, or some people think it was used as like camouflage, and there was other prehistoric plants that looked similar to this, and it would just, kind of sit by it and just be there. Some even think that it used these scales to jump off of a tree and get a little bit of lift, so it would kind of parachute down with these scales. I really like that idea. I don't really think there's much evidence supporting that, but I like to talk about things that are fun like that. I mean, how many animals just have a straight up parachute? That's baller. Erythrosuchus. This thing looked like T-Rex head that was attached to the body of like a little crocodile thing. Apparently this thing dominated the early Triassic period. It was actually the largest predator of its time at 16 feet long. Basically, it was just a mouth that would run around, and you gotta give it to them. Good design. Hats off to you. Here's it next to a person. Why does it look scarier like this? It looks a lot more scary. It looks a lot more formidable. Imagine it didn't have legs. That would actually be extremely scary. Imagine this thing slithering around and its mouth is like that. Imagine it had 2 more legs. Anyways, it reminds me a lot of those creatures that the stormtroopers rode on Tatooine in the original Star Wars movie, Star Wars: A New Hope. Skinny whale. So this is Tokarahia. So this is an extinct genus of baleen whale that lived in the seas surrounding New Zealand during the Oligocene. I think these things were really weird because they're like pretty skinny looking compared to other whales, and pretty much I saw this picture online and I thought it looked cool, so I wanted to talk about it. But after looking into it, there's really not a whole lot about these whales at all. Hammerhead reptile. This is a herbivore marine reptile, not a dinosaur, named Otopodentatus. This thing had this really strange looking zipper mouth that was full of these interlocking teeth, and scientists think the reason why it had these is because it was like basically an ancient lawnmower. This thing moved along the ground, sucking down moss, using its front teeth like a chisel to scrape algae off the hard surfaces like rocks, and then it would filter feed like a whale shell, using its rear tiny needle mesh-like teeth to filter out the algae without getting big stuff in. And for a long time, they thought these things had vertical mouths that, really looked really strange. But kind of more recently, in 2016, they've discovered that they had more of a hammerhead-shaped face, and its face kind of looked like the head of a vacuum cleaner, which I guess that's just the most efficient way to suck stuff in, Postosuchus. This was an apex predator that kind of looked like a crocodile that walked upright or like semi-upright. This thing lived in the Lake Triassic in North America and could get up to 16 feet long. Apparently, they dominated even during the time that something like the Allosaurus was running around. So that's kind of crazy. Tier 6, Dunkleosteus. So this was a prehistoric looking fish that was nightmare fuel. They used to think it was massive at like 20 to 30 feet long, but now they found out that it's more likely about 16 feet long max. But what made this thing so deadly was it had this armored head. That skull and jawbone doubled as built-in teeth. So it was all one big bone. And it was thought to have one of the most powerful bite forces ever, at an estimated 11,000 pounds of force, rivaling even the T-Rex. Moving on, we have the moa. So this was a really cool bird that kind of went extinct fairly recently as well. It was a flightless bird that had really large versions of the species that got up to 12 feet tall and over 500 pounds. So this was a massive bird once again. These things were native to New Zealand, where they ended up going extinct within the first 100 years of humans settling there. Most species were gone by the mid-1400s, mainly because of overhunting, and although it's been extinct for 500 years, there are still kind of random rumors about how people are seeing them in different areas, and there's some alleged sightings where people report them specifically in dense areas in remote New Zealand. But I imagine these things as if they are like the southern cassowary. If they're anything similar to them, they would be extremely dangerous and aggressive, and especially at that size, they would be a threat to the entire world. But yeah, southern cassowary, if this is like that, oh my gosh, because it's a threat already at its height. What is it, 6 feet tall? And this thing is what, double? Barynosuchus. So this is the largest land predator since the dinosaurs lived. It was a huge land hunting crocodile thing that is kind of like that one we talked about earlier, but this thing was estimated to be 25 feet long and over 1.6 tons. It's just so weird to look at crocodile things that have really long legs. It just feels wrong. This thing likely used its long legs to run or gallop, which also just wrong, seeing a predator gallop. As you can see here, its legs are long. Anytime there's a crocodile and its legs are too long, it's like, oh no, that's a threat. I feel like there's some sort of instinctual thing in your brain when you see a reptile that's legs are too long, Next is a familiar one, the dodo. So dodo birds are actually kind of a fun one. I didn't know exactly why these things went extinct, but essentially these are actually just giant pigeons. These things a really long time ago were accidentally blown off course where they found themselves on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. When they got there, they had no predators and they had tons of food, so they evolved into these really large birds because of island giganticism, and they lost their ability to fly, and eventually they lost their fear of predators because they had none. And so whenever European sailors discovered the island in the 1500s, these birds went extinct like within 100 years. By the late 1600s, they were gone, not just because they were getting hunted by humans, but also because of invasive species that were brought in like pigs and dogs. And what a lot of people don't know is these birds probably weren't like really clumsy and dumb and slow as people like to say they are, but they're probably fairly fast but lacked prey instinct, and so that's really why they kind of dwindled down in number. Also, despite the dodo's fame today, there was very little record of it at the time it was alive, because even before modern science could document these things existing, they had already disappeared. So nobody cared and nobody really knew about what they were until later on we were like, oh, that was bad. we lost our giant pigeon friends that were really cool looking too. Not as cool as the great auk, but still really cool. Leopleurodon. So this is a large marine reptile that lived in the Jurassic period around Europe. It had a short neck, huge skull, 4 powerful flippers, and was about 25 feet long. I know what you're thinking. It is not as long as it was depicted in the Walking with Dinosaurs show back in the day, because that show depicted it being like 80 feet long, but sadly that's exaggerated. This thing was still big. Its skull reached over 4 feet long, giving it one of the most powerful bites of any Jurassic marine reptile. And overall, I really like the Leopleurodon. I would even call it magical. Tier 7, Arthropleura. So this was the largest land-dwelling bug that ever existed on Earth. It's hard to think about a bug that is the length of a small car scampering around, dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. This is an extinct species of giant millipede that could grow up to 8.5 feet long and weigh as much as 110 pounds. That is longer than an alligator, and it weighs more than a Great Dane. This creature lived during a time when oxygen levels were really high on Earth, and scientists think that because of this, vertebrate predators were very scarce. So this thing had no known predators. We also think this thing didn't see very well and had to use different other senses to get around. And anyways, yeah, it's horrible nightmare fuel, and I'm glad it's dead. Sorry, I'm not sorry. It's a bug. Speaking of bugs, but not really, next we have the hallucigenia. So this is a worm that not only has spines down its back, but also claws. This is a tiny Cambrian worm named for its really strange dreamlike build. Its body was actually so strange that when scientists were trying to reconstruct it, they reconstructed it upside down for decades. And also they kept putting its head on the wrong end of its body, so they thought its butt was its head. But if you look close to its face, it has this kind of surprising like smiling look to its face with a mouth lined with teeth, and this thing is best known for its role in Attack on Titan. Triassic Kraken. So I really like this one, even though haters gonna say it's fake. So in Nevada State Park, there is this fossil site where remains have been found of bones of multiple ichthyosaurs, which are, massive marine reptiles that can be larger than 60 feet long. But the bones of these creatures seem to be buried meticulously in this arranged pattern, as if it was purposefully placed in a spiral line shape. This is obviously really strange. So a paleontologist named Mark McMenamin came up with this idea called this hypothetical ancient intelligent giant squid that was like 100 feet long that killed these ichthyosaurs and then arranged these bones almost as a self-portrait of its squid tentacles. Even supported by this theory is evidence of fragmented fossilized squid beak that was found nearby, and overwhelmingly the scientific community has rejected this idea and they think it's insane, and the beak was too fragmented and not hardly any evidence for all of this speculation was found. And there's also no evidence of like intelligent behavior like this from a squid. I don't know, I feel like there is something about these octopus and squid-like creatures that we're not quite seeing. Like their eyes are really weird. Moving on to marsupial lion. This is Thylacoleo, a really cool marsupial lion-looking thing that lived in what is now modern-day Australia. Despite the nickname, it is not a lion or a cat, but it is rather a marsupial, just like kangaroos and possums and koalas, and it had a pouch just like all of those animals. This was roughly the size of a modern-day jaguar, a large modern-day jaguar, and it had some really strange adaptations, such as extremely sharp claws, with the first digit being much larger, kind of like a raptor. But what's really weird is its mouth. Despite its size, it had the strongest bite force of any mammal of its size, and its teeth kind of didn't make a whole lot of sense. It kind of looks like if it was a herbivore that ate meat, if that makes sense. It looks like it couldn't decide whether it was a herbivore or a carnivore. It had these large pointy front teeth that it likely used to stab into its prey, and these crazy modified premolars that did heavy slicing and crushing, and possibly even for cracking bones. And no other mammal had teeth in this shape or to use like this. Perucetus. So this is an extinct early whale creature from Peru. Just a couple years ago, I think it was like 2023, a new paper had came out about how they thought this was the heaviest animal to ever exist, and they thought it could weigh like 340 tons, but now it is not thought to be as massive, at like a maximum of like 80 tons, which is still really, really big. The anatomy of this thing is very strange overall. It was kind of like a big slug with little arm things, kind of like a swimming Jabba the Hutt, but it's known for its incredibly dense bones, and it was likely extremely slow moving, and it maybe moved more like hippos in shallow water, kind of like bounding around, although I guess hippos can move pretty quick though. Tier 8, final tier, Dinotherium. This might be my favorite one on this whole thing. This is an ancient relative to modern day elephants that had extremely weird look overall. Just a weird looking elephant with this strange lower jaw that had downward curving tusks, and it was extremely tall, taller than any modern day elephant. One skull that they found of it was so massive, it was like probably one of the top 5 largest land mammals of all time from a male of one of these things, and they think it was like 16 feet tall. A little known fact about the Dinotherium is that it likely used its downward tusks for stripping bark and pulling branches off trees and digging up roots rather than for combat. And fun fact, when they first found the fossils of this thing, they thought it was a species of tapir. Next we have Helicoprion, also known as the buzzsaw-toothed shark. This is a crazy looking shark-like thing that was slightly longer than a great white. Scientists had a really hard time reconstructing it because, I mean, just look at it. They found a fossil that had this big spiral of teeth, and they didn't know if these teeth went on the inside or the outside or the upper or the lower. They looked at a bunch of different things, and eventually they settled on it looking more like this, where you cannot visibly see the spiral on the outside, although the outside model was really cool. Rather, the teeth spiral growing on the inside of the lower jaw. And the best theory on why they had teeth like this tucked up in there growing in a circle is because they are just like sperm whales, and they would fight and eat squids, and also like the sperm whale, they only had bottom teeth and a narrow jaw, and so they used them for slicing and processing soft body prey like squids. And so essentially its teeth moved like a circular saw or a conveyor belt, where the newest teeth would push older, smaller ones back as they grew, efficiently cutting and forcing food back into the jaw, into the mouth to eat. And you can look at the Helicoprion over the decades. In the 1900s, it had just this crazy upper lip spiral. I don't have any idea what the purpose of that would have been, but I vibe with it. 1960s classic look. We got the outside spiral. This is the one I'd be busting with. This is the one that I kind of vibe with the most. Then in the 1980s, we had this one that not bad. I mean, you know, do you. I'm cool with it. And then in 2020, we have the new redefined design. Very cool, but it doesn't vibe as hard as the 1960s, if we're being honest. Scythe lizard. So this is Therizinosaurus. It is this freaky looking feathered covered dinosaur that had these super long claws that could be like 3 feet long, which made it the longest claws of any animal to ever exist. Despite being terrifying looking and, you know, having these long claws and being a theropod, it's actually not a carnivore, but rather it is a herbivore, and it possessed different features like a beak and a small head and leaf-eating teeth, and it likely primarily used its claws like a scythe to gather plants, swiping and pulling off branches and leaves from plants. They also think that maybe it used its claws more for display when attracting mates, or kind of just for intimidating rivals and defending itself. This This thing lived during the Cretaceous period in what is now Asia, and kind of a funny thing about it is its claws were so weird that when they originally found fossils of it, they were like, surely this is from a large turtle thing, and it had flippers, and the claws just grew off of the flippers, right? And so here's another chart. This is the first model of it. In the 1950s, they thought it was a turtle-like reptile with scythe-like claws. And then by the 1990s, they realized, oh, this is a weird theropod and it's got a long neck. And now in 2020, it's kind of more ground sloth-like, and they realized that it probably had feathers. Overall, weird. Everything about it is weird. Uintatherium. So the Uintatherium has the body of a rhino, 6 bony horns that sticks out of its skull, and saber-tooth-like tusks. This thing stood about 5.5 feet tall at its shoulder. It was 13 feet long. It was about the same size as a modern-day rhinoceros. While sometimes in old renditions of this thing and like concept art, they depicted this creature as having these horns that were pointy and looked like they would just like keep growing, kind of like a deer or I guess I'd say a bull. It seems that this probably wasn't the case, and that they are rather more like ossicones, like drabs have, which are like these bumps that kind of just grow up out of the skull and then have skin over the top of these bumps. And they were likely used by males for display, for mating, or even in defense from others for territory. The other really prominent thing about them is that they had these long canine fang tusk things that look really out of place for a rhinoceros looking creature. So they didn't use these fangs for hunting, as you know, it didn't eat meat. It likely used them for display or finding and impressing a mate, or just like if something was looking at it, it would just flash its fangs just overall for dominance, because, you know, flash those huge chompers. Who wants to deal with a horned creature with fangs? And also it's the size of a rhino. I mean, I don't even want to deal with something with fangs. So when it's got horns too, I'm gonna probably not deal with it. Tanystrophus. So this is an extremely weird dinosaur looking thing that wasn't a dinosaur. It had an obscenely long neck, as you can tell. Now, I thought this was just like a strangely proportioned variant of sauropod, but it's actually not a sauropod at all, and it's not even a dinosaur. It's actually a archosauromorph reptile that lived during the Triassic period in most of the world. As you can probably tell, it's known for having this extremely long neck that is longer than both its torso and tail combined. And from pictures, you might think this thing is huge, like a sauropod, but no, actually, it's a lot more human-sized, and really, it's only around 20 feet long. What's also surprising about it is it's not a herbivore like, you know, sauropods, but it's rather got sharp teeth like a carnivore, and it likely spent most of its time just lounging along waterways where it would use its long neck to ambush hunt and grab fish out of the water and just start going to town on them, which, you know, sounds like a pretty good life, you know. All right, last one on this list, we have the Tully monster. So this might be the craziest looking animal of all time. It's got to be like one of the weirdest ones to ever exist. Tully monstrum, also known as the Tully monster, is so strange that even now paleontologists don't really know exactly what it was, whether it was a fish or a squid thing or an insect. This creature had crazy looking eyes that shot off of its torso like an antenna, as if it was like a snail. It had this freaky looking mouth claw that came out front of it or out rear of it. The orientation's kind of mixed up. And this mouth claw thing had sharp teeth inside of it. And while personally I always thought this thing was like big, like maybe it was like shark sized, no, this thing was actually fairly small, only being about 14 inches long. Its body is very squid-like, so they estimate it kind of moved kind of like a cuttlefish, the way it moves. The discovery of this thing was kind of insane. There's only one single place where this species has been found, and it's in this coal mining pit in Illinois, where the first one was found by an amateur fossil hunter in 1958, and since then 20,000 species have been found, but only exclusively in that tiny area in Illinois. So it just seems really odd, because you would think that this creature lived in like shallow tropical coastline water. And this is like the only place, I guess maybe this is the only place to preserve a fossil like this because it doesn't have bones. It's boneless. The boneless fossil. But to this day, the true classification of this creature has still not been figured out. And it's always kind of back and forth whether it's a vertebrae, whether it's an invertebrate, or something completely unique, making it one of the most mysterious fossils ever discovered. Wow, and just like that, we are at the end of the Weird Extinct Animals iceberg. If you watched to the end of this video, then you are a deranged viewer, and I thank you. There's something wrong with you. So subscribe. If you're here right now, subscribe. I don't know why you wouldn't. If you watch the end, hit subscribe. You don't have to. If you don't like this stuff, just don't. But if you do, then do. But if you didn't like it, unsubscribe right now. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you for 590,000 subs. I was here. If you're here before 600,000 subs, I was here. You can say that. You can be that guy. But if you want to support the channel, I have merch that is very epic. We got Hollow Earth, Lobotomy in 2004, me and the boys cryptid hunting team. We got Kraken is real. We all know the Kraken's real. It's not even a debate. But if you want to keep up with me a little bit more, I have an Instagram at Sacabambaspis. I got a group on there that's a fun time. And yeah, overall, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for being just like me for real. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.